Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a video and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Today, it is my privilege to welcome a very accomplished technology professional from Cupertino, USA, Mr. VR Ferose. Ferose, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Feroz is the Senior Vice President and Head of the SAP Academy in the US. He has been the Managing Director of SAP Labs in India. He's a highly recognized and awarded individual. He's a member of the exclusive Young Global Leaders Fraternity from the World Economic Forum. He's the founder of the India Inclusion Summit. He's the co-author of 3 books, Gifted, Innovating the World, and Globalization Advantage. And the third one is Grit, the Major Story. So, Feroz, at such a young age, you've achieved so much. What would you say are the 3 key milestones in your life or career?
Thank you. I mean, you made me reflect on my entire journey, but I'll probably start by saying, which may sound a little odd, but actually getting married was a huge milestone, and the reason I'm saying this is I got married to my college sweetheart, and I'm a Muslim and she's a Hindu, and everybody said, Feroz, this is a perfect recipe for disaster. And it took me 10 years before both set of parents agreed on the marriage. We both had decided we will only marry when our parents bless us, and it took us 10 years. And when I look back, I think that has been a huge milestone for both of us, and it's very rare that you get to spend your entire life with someone you love. So I think that was extremely important.
Right.
On a professional front, like you had mentioned in the introduction, I was very fortunate to become the managing director at a very young age. I was 33 when I was heading SAP. I was the first, non-German head of a global multinational in India. And I when I look back, I think becoming a kind of a MD role at a young age had a certain advantage that I was still incredibly idealist.
Correct.
I hadn't become a realist, and so a lot of what we were able to achieve was because I was bold and fearless and still an idealist. I think now I've become a lot more practical and wiser. But I think that was, from a professional point, a very defining moment. And finally, I found my purpose through my son's diagnosis of autism. He's now 11 years old. I was shattered and depressed when his diagnosis happened. But I think through a series of incidences and great mentors, I converted that into my purpose and mission for life. So I think those 3 would be probably the 3 most defining moments of my life.
Fantastic. You're one of the few people who've defined 3 key milestones which are so personal to you.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
fantastic.
You,
well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, I want to talk about the India Inclusion Summit.
Yeah.
I know you're very passionate about it.
Yeah.
Tell me about this venture.
So as I said, when my son was diagnosed with autism, he was 18 months old, and he's my only son, and I went through. Everybody goes through this. They call it the 5 stages of grief, right? Starting from denial to, final acceptance. I went through that, and I was very fortunate that my mentor at that time, two mentors who played a huge role. First was Dr. Kiran Bedi, who actually called me up when I was at the lowest point, and she said, Feroz, beta, what happened? Why are you so silent? You haven't spoken to me. And when I said that, Vivan has been diagnosed with autism, she said something that really changed my life. And she said, Feroz, most people spend their entire life not knowing what their purpose is. You're incredibly fortunate. The purpose found you.
Wow.
And she said, it's not about, while as a parent, your first responsibility is to your child, and that should always be your first responsibility, but you are also in a position of influence. You're also in a position where you have the network and the financial independence to make a difference, not just for your son, but hundreds and thousands others who are not as fortunate. If you make this your mission for life, you would lead a very fulfilling life. And, that moment, sir, was like a switch. I was treating myself as a victim, and suddenly I was seeing myself as somebody who's given this incredible blessing to make a meaningful difference.
Wow.
But I also didn't know what to do. I mean, it sounds all good, but I don't know what to do. And that's when Arun Shauri said, Feroz, disability is seen as a taboo topic in India. What you could do is make it front and center, let people celebrate people's differences. Let's not put a narrative which is about sad and sympathy, but really celebrate people's differences. And that's when I realized that there was no platform in India and actually across the world where it was focused entirely on disability.
Mhm.
And that's how in 2012 we started this inclusion summit, where we said this is 2 days of celebration for people with disabilities.
Mhm.
And this year we celebrated the ninth year,
Wow.
and is now world's largest platform for people with disabilities.
Incredible. Incredible. So tell me that, talking about India and certainly about the developing part of the world,
Yeah,
diversity and inclusion is just about beginning to become relevant.
yeah,
What can be done, Feroz, to expedite? Because we are all human beings. If there are
yeah,
some challenges that we face, we have to work together to overcome them. And
yeah.
yet, in countries like ours, as you said, it becomes a big, big, big challenge. So, why is it
So,
becoming, how can we expedite the
so
diversity and inclusion?
absolutely spot on. As I said, when I started my journey, it was in 2012, and I've been very fortunate to have not just traveled the world, but now I'll see what's happening in the US vis-a-vis what's happening in India. And I think India is at least 20 years behind the US. And I'm not saying everything is perfect here, but I think India has a lot of catching up to do.
Correct.
But one thing what I've realized is that true change will only happen, I think, at the intersection of government, non-profits, and corporates.
Correct.
And that's my big realization, because I kind of have lived a world where I'm a corporate person. I run my own NGO, and I've friends in the government. And the reason I'm saying this is I found that the non-profits are doing great work and they lead with compassion, which is important. Corporates have the ability to put the right people and the financial bandwidth behind a cause, and governments are the only people who can scale.
Correct.
I think the intersection of all these three is where things happen. And I can tell you, and I've seen this personally, the topic of diversity and inclusion took forefront because the corporates led it.
Mm.
It's become a corporate agenda. There is no large multinational which doesn't have a chief diversity and inclusion officer. But this movement started, I would say, like 5 years back. And now, because corporates led it, it's now become something that is being openly discussed about. So I think true change will only happen when all these three intersect. And I feel the big challenge now is most of them work on their own. I think the nonprofits are doing great work, but they don't necessarily collaborate with the corporates other than when they want funds. Right? Corporates are only saying, how does it affect my bottom line? And
Correct.
governments are always talking about how do I make it easy, but really how do you scale is most important. So I think at the intersection is where true change will happen.
And do you think this intersection will happen in the developing world in a hurry, or is it going to take time?
Unfortunately, my personal, I mean, I'm sad to say this, but the change is extremely slow in India. And in fact, on 3rd December, just 3 days back, I wrote a whole column in Mint about the 6 reasons why disability has not become a movement in India. And there is a beautiful documentary on Netflix which is called Crip Camp, which was actually produced by Barack Obama, which I think was nominated for, won the Oscars. It's about the disability movement, how it started. And I think it's a great blueprint of how, when people come together for a cause, you can drive change. And my first thinking is that why it has not happened in India is there is no collective anger. We have all accepted चलता है attitude. Fine, there's a problem, we'll find a जुगाड़ solution. Right? ठीक है, accessible नहीं है तो हम manage कर लेंगे. Unless there is collective anger, you cannot drive change.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So people find jugaad solution for everything, but that doesn't change systems.
Correct. In fact, I hate this word jugaad. I think it's done more
Yes.
to India than any,
Yeah.
terrible word to have. But,
Yeah.
I was talking yesterday to someone
Yeah.
who has been visually impaired,
Yeah.
and he also actually founded the World Blind Cricket Council and led the first Blind Cricket World Cup.
Are you talking about George, sir? George
Correct.
Abraham?
Yes,
Yeah,
George
very
Brown.
dear friend. Very dear
So
friend.
I interviewed him yesterday, and he was
Yeah.
telling me that it is not visual impairment which is the challenge, it is the mindset
Spot on.
of the other people who's a challenge. And what you're saying
Absolutely
is
spot on.
exactly the same.
Yeah. And
Wonderful.
and that's also the hardest to change. You can always build a ramp, and you can do a lot of these symbolic things, but changing mindsets has to come from deep inside you.
Yeah, very true. So, Firoz, tell me now, at work, for yourself, what are some of the core values you believe in?
You know, the first thing is I'm a great believer that people are inherently good. Okay, I mean, you have to start. That's how one of my core principles is trust people by default unless proven wrong.
Hmm.
I must confess there are times where I've been disappointed because I've trusted the wrong people, and I'm kind of sometimes leaning towards should I really trust or should I first let them prove before I trust. And my whole philosophy has been that trust produces speed, right? But it also sometimes can derail you because you've made some bad judgments.
Correct.
But on the larger scope of things, I think I trust people unless proven wrong. So that's been a core principle. The other thing is I'm a huge believer. In fact, my next book is also titled Givers.
Hmm.
I'm a huge believer that being a giver is a good strategy.
Okay.
And it works. And there is a beautiful book by Adam Grant called Give and Take, who's a fellow YGL, and he's proven that even in large corporates, if you're a giver, it has a higher chance of success in the long run. So I'm an inherent believer that if you it's better to be a giver than a taker or a matcher.
Terrific. And you've led large companies. You're continuing to lead large businesses. You will continue to get into much bigger corporate roles. What, according to you, are some of the qualities a CEO should have?
It may sound a little cliched, but I think we have to get empathy fashionable. We have to make empathy sexy because I
Correct.
think sometimes people say empathy is blah blah stuff, and but my the way I will like to frame is make empathy. You have to lead with empathy at the core
Hmm.
and ambition at the edges.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of people do the other way around.
Hmm.
They lead with ambition at the core and empathy at the edges.
Okay.
And the classic example of two leaders who followed that principle is Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft. And you can look at any of their speeches or any of their actions. They lead with empathy. Doesn't mean they're not ambitious. They're incredibly ambitious, but ambition is at the not at the core. Ambition is at the edge. So that's one core belief that I have,
Okay.
that every leader should follow. The second is really good leaders have great clarity of thought. They're clear. They can, they're not clouded in confusion. So clarity of thought helps them make better decisions. And finally, really, purity of intent. And this is something for me, being a huge fan of Gandhiji and having studied, his whole idea that purity of intent
Hmm.
is the most important thing. It's not just the outcome, but purity of intent,
Okay.
and is very important. So those are probably some of the principles that I
Very
believe in.
well said. Very well said. And again, as you look at your own role and as you look at your own large organizations, what would you say is your leadership style?
I think I'd be a little arrogant to say that myself. I maybe it's better if you ask the people who worked with me, right?
Yeah. But what,
Because
what
I,
feedback would they give you?
I think I want to believe that I really follow and believe in a servant leadership style.
Hmm.
But I think our styles also evolve with time.
Hmm.
I must confess, when I was much younger, when I was running a large organization, I was not wise enough. I mean, when I look back, I made a lot of mistakes and a lot of stupid decisions, and I was maybe a little bit arrogant. And now I'm a much more wiser. So I think our styles also evolve with time,
Correct.
right? So it's not fixed.
Correct.
You learn, but I would like to believe that I at least follow a servant leadership style. But again, I don't want to answer that
Fair enough.
with I would say
Understand.
my team may be able to answer that better.
Understand. Understand. So we'll move on. Let's talk about your
Yeah,
books now.
yeah,
You've written three books, and you just said
yeah,
you're coming on to your fourth one, which is titled Give. But tell me
yeah.
about your first three books.
So the first book was really inspired by the people whom I saw come
Mm.
to the India Inclusion Summit. It's fascinating that every year we have like 15, 20 speakers. And the speaker that got the standing ovation was always the unsung hero.
Mm.
It was never the celebrities. I mean, we always have the big names that attract. But the ones who got the standing ovation with broke people down were the unsung heroes. And I
Mm.
was always saddened by the fact that these people were not written about.
Mm.
And that's how I wrote my first book, which was called Gifted. And I said, I'll tell the stories of 15 people with disabilities who are
Mm.
not world famous. I mean, they're doing
No.
simple stuff, but
Mm.
their stories are such incredible. So that's how I wrote Gifted.
Mm.
My second book was really more business related, called The Globalization Advantage.
Mm.
And that was basically, I was heading a team where we were building software for the world, and I was really talking about that.
Mm.
The first one became a bestseller, won the Kannada Sahitya Academy Award. The business one obviously was more targeted audience to specific SAP employees. And the
Mhm.
last one was a graphic novel. And I realized I wanted to write a graphic novel
Mm.
primarily because I wanted to reach out to children.
Okay.
And I said that is a format where children would love to read.
Mm.
I realized that I wasn't reaching the younger generation.
Mm.
So again, I wrote about Major DP Singh, who's a very war veteran from Kargil
Mm.
and has a great story. So I said, how do I tell this story to the younger audience? And
Mm.
I wrote it in a graphic novel format.
Very nice. Very nice. And you said the fourth one is coming out.
Yes, in fact, I kind of write like three books in parallel. So the one that I've finished now is actually a blueprint for making India inclusive. I haven't figured out the final title yet, but we
Mhm.
finished the manuscript.
Mm.
And the other one, which I'm writing in parallel, is called Givers, Profiles, in Generosity, where I'm talking about 15 people whom I think are great givers who are unknown. And my research showed that the best giver, you'll never know who the best giver is because the best giver is always anonymous.
Giving is something which I have, been reading a lot about, and I was on the board of Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, for a
Hmm.
long time,
Hmm.
and I've often wondered why is it that people in the US
Hmm.
are the biggest givers
Hmm.
and Indians are still not mature enough to start giving. And when I say giving,
Hmm.
I'm talking of
Sure.
financial giving, not time.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Beautiful question. I mean, as I said, there's a lot of data around that, and maybe I'll give you one data about Indians in America because that's the access that I
Mm.
have. They
Mm.
found that Indians in America give four times more. I'm talking about financial giving
Correct.
than Indians in India.
Yeah.
I mean, these are Indians who live in the US. So
Correct.
that's clear data which shows
Mm.
that somehow people in India are not good at giving financially.
Yeah.
But however, my whole narrative is money is just one form of currency.
Correct.
So why do we measure giving only in that one form? And
Mm.
I believe that's a flawed metric itself. And
Mm.
I don't believe that Bill Gates is the biggest giver or because he's given the most number of
Mm.
amount of money. And I want to kind of change that narrative
Mm.
and say that it's better to give as you go than to first accumulate and then give.
Correct. Correct.
Right, so you accumulated 100 billion and then you give 99 billion. What's the big deal? But if you
Absolutely.
keep giving as you go, I think it makes more sense.
I
That's first
agree.
insight. And the most, if there is one takeaway that I would like to have out of the research, it's not about how much you give,
Mm.
it's about how much you're willing to give up.
Agree. Agree.
And I say, can Bill Gates, I mean, I'm just giving a name, or
Mm.
Mark
Mm. I
Zuckerberg,
know. Mm.
give up their 100% of their wealth
Mm.
and live a regular life? The answer is no.
Mm.
But there are a lot of people, a beggar on the street sometimes shares the only meal he has with the next person. He's given 50% of everything he had,
Mm.
even though he doesn't know whether he'll go the next meal. So my belief is that giving is not so much about what you give, but what you're willing to give up.
Give up. Well said. Well said. So let me move to the last section of our conversation, which is some questions for you personally.
Sure.
My first question, Feroz, is that no, so much recognition, so much you've achieved, so much you will continue to achieve. What does success mean to Feroz?
I've often spoken about this, and my simple statement is success is overrated.
Okay.
In fact, I teach a subject at Columbia University, and that title is called "From Success to Significance."
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is success is about yourself, right? What's your position, your salary, your house, your car, and I'm like, that doesn't really matter. But significance is what have you done for others?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that in the world we live in, success is overrated, significance is underrated. And I think we need to flip that. I think we need to start measuring people by what they've done for others, and not so much about what they've done for themselves.
Very good. Very nice. My next follow on question is that where do you draw your inspiration from?
I think there's a good in everybody. So however cliched it may sound, every time I meet someone, I learn something. I've learned something from you. But I'm also a voracious reader. So if you see my room is full of full of books.
Yes.
So I kind of, my wife says I consume books, I eat books. So I read a lot, and reading gives me a lot of interesting insights. But I also try to meet as many people as I can. So I get energy from a lot of different sources.
Wonderful. My next question to you is on failure, and this is
Sure,
my second last question to you.
sure,
I
sure.
have a book coming out on failure in February. I've often said that in South Asia, parents don't teach their children it's okay to fail. It's
I
always
agree.
come first, be first, the head of the queue, and it manifests itself in our behavior patterns. And yet we fail all the time. So, my question to you is what have been your biggest learnings from some of your biggest mistakes or failures?
So my big learning, and some of them huge failures, and I don't have the time to go through it in
Yeah.
detail, but there are two key learnings. The first is that pain dilutes ego,
Mhm.
because
Well said.
failure is always painful.
Correct.
Okay, but pain is the only way that dilutes your ego. And as I said, I thought I was successful when I was young, but it also sometimes makes you a little arrogant and cocky. But as soon as you fail, it really dilutes your ego, right?
Correct.
And I think every successful person has a healthy sense of ego.
Correct.
But I think pain dilutes ego. That's my first learning. And my second learning is that, you know, humility comes when you know that you're not in control.
Mm. Well said.
What power does is that it makes you feel that you are in control.
Mm.
When, as I said, when I was leading organizations, a lot of people, I felt that, I could control the outcome.
Mm.
And there were many instances when I quickly realized I could not. That made me humble.
Okay.
So humility comes when you know that you're not in control.
Fantastic. And Feroz, my last question to you, and this is for the thousands of young people who will watch our conversation and will hear you speak. Someone who's really gone to very high levels at a very young age. What would your advice be to a young individual starting off on their corporate journey?
I've said this, it doesn't matter whether you're starting on a corporate journey or any journey in life. And my core thinking has been, I see my role to be that of lifting others, right? Now, you don't have to be a manager to be able to lift others. I think you can do that to your
Sure.
friend, you can do that to
Yes.
your spouse, to your neighbor. But if you keep that intention in mind, I think you're going to go places,
Wonderful.
right? And maybe much more practical advice is surround yourself with good people and good books.
Correct. That's well said.
That's it.
Well said. Feroz, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you. I wish you, the India Inclusion Summit, and everything that you're doing with your employer SAP, lots and lots of success.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I'm such an honor to be
Thank you.
speaking to you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast. a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.